ladies and gentlemen, Panzer here, and today we're taking a look at Dying Light. Now, you might be thinking, okay, well this is a game that's already come out, surely the hype has died down, and why am I still doing a video of it? Well, I only got it recently, and it's taken a bit of time to play the game and kind of figure it out, so I can do my first impressions of it. And it's an odd game. It seems to be a mishmash of a lot of other games, but for the most part, it's a first-person zombie action parkour game. If you're thinking along the lines of Mirror's Edge, you kind of have an idea of what I'm talking about. So before we begin, I just want to point out a couple of things in the options menu, because obviously this is not a PC-first title as it may actually appear. This is, in fact, a console port. Specifically which console, I'm not entirely sure, but this becomes apparent when you check out the control options. Now, first things first, mouse sensitivity is a little bit strange. I would much rather have an actual value here, as I would for a lot of options, but the sensitivity at default seems to be okay, but as you bump it up the increments and stuff, it seems to change very, very quickly. For example, a very slight change like that can make a lot of difference. But having separate sliders for sensitivity in the menu as well is actually really useful. Mouse smoothing and stuff, you want that off entirely. But the thing I want to point out is the key bindings. Because these key bindings, although there are a lot of them and they're all fully rebindable, they aren't actually complete. And why I say this is because there are actually alternate keys for a lot of these options as well. For example, using equipment is stated here as middle mouse button, but actually I found you can also do that using the G key in some cases. And at the same time, you can control the menu not just using the Q and E as you can see up here on top, but you can also control it using the W, A, S, and D keys, something that's not stated anywhere in the game. So it's very tricky sometimes if you accidentally hit a particular key and find that it actually controls something. So, not really something that I particularly like having in a game. I'd much rather have all of the keybinds listed and have them all rebindable. As you might expect, those that are not listed are clearly not rebindable, so that's not something that's particularly good. As far as the game options go, the volume sliders are all listed under game and not audio, which is a bit strange. Subtitles are also incomplete. Some speech, for example, in the cinematics and cutscenes, there are subtitles, but for speech for some characters just talking in the background, there's no subtitles at all, so not particularly good there. Video options, there are a lot of them, but not as much as, well, a lot of other games, and full screen option here, I believe, includes borderless. But the actual full screen option is kind of borderless, but it causes some weird monitor rearrangement when that happens. I'm not entirely sure why that is. Now, I'm running this. Again, this is controlled by the mouse wheel, yet you can scroll using the mouse wheel, which is a little bit annoying. Alright, so some of these settings, since the recent patch, do make a lot more difference, and it's a lot better optimized than when it first came out, but even so, I have to run this on much lower quality simply because my computer is not top of the line, and I do struggle to reach 60 FPS on this game, which is unfortunate. Anyway, enough about options, let's continue to the game. So I'm actually playing the campaign. I've got a few hours into this, and I've unlocked the co-op play as well as, well, free roam and a bunch of the abilities. There is also a option down here, Be the Zombie. I think this is actually part of the DLC. I'm not sure about that, but I've not tried it yet. So let's get into the game and see how we're going.
The owner of the garage, and basically threatened his life if he didn't pay up. This makes me sick. It's not like I break legs for the mob.
Alright, here we are, and already we've kind of spawned into a less than ideal situation. Trying to find a place so that we can actually explore what's going on. So first things first, and it's quite fortunate that I'm here because this is a very good looking game. As you can see here, we have panoramic views and a very big city to explore. This zombie seems very keen on coming to get me and killing me. Not ideal at all. That was actually one of the special types of infected that explode themselves. Alright, so the ambience of the game, you can actually hear everything from sort of gunshots, debris falling, and even the screams of zombies, as you might have just heard, at all times. Now, I say this is a mishmash of games, and I'm going to demonstrate that to you firstly. So, right now, doing parkour here, this is very reminiscent. In fact, it controls very similarly to Mirror's Edge, which is a game I enjoyed quite a lot. And the actual movement is quite responsive in most cases and quite intuitive, provided you are able to aim correctly. See, it is directionally driven. If I look at a particular direction, the character will jump into a particular direction. So, for example, here, if by hitting space and holding, I actually can grab onto this ledge. By looking over there, I can jump in that direction. But you have to hold down the jump key in order to sort of maintain that hold. Now, it is dipping below 30 at the moment, partly because there's a lot of these particle effects which aren't normally here. Bear in mind that you do get better frame rates indoors than outdoors, which is to be expected. But even on medium quality, you can see just in the distance there, the texture quality is not fantastic at all. Okay, so this is a demonstration of what it is like for Mirror's Edge anyway. Now let's have a look at combat. Recognize that? It's probably because it seems like the same thing that was in Dead Island. The combat system is very reminiscent of that, but it's not a bad thing. It is actually quite satisfying to use. The damage modeling on the zombies is particularly good, and they react to hits very nicely as well. They stumble and in some cases fall over completely, and you can do all sorts of things like kick them into like these spikes over here, or you can kick them off ledges and stuff like that, which is very, very nice. And they interact with the environment in a very nice way. So they, for example, kicking them through a weak roof can cause them to break through that roof, and you can see here they stumble as well. And that will actually open up, for example, a new travel route for you, or maybe even attract other zombies to the area. And you can see here, when zombies get too close, they can actually grapple onto you. And there is an ability that allows you to grapple back and throw them in a different direction. So that's something to bear in mind. So let's just get away. Alright, so that's our little warning there that the sun is setting. There is a day and night cycle in this game, and it, if I remember correctly, is about an hour of play for the daytime and approximately 7 minutes for nighttime. Now that seems like a very, very short time, but believe me, once night falls, you're going to wish it was shorter, actually. So over here, let's have a little bit of Skyrim in this game. This lockpicking mechanic is exactly like Skyrim. There's no question about it. It works exactly the same way. So you can see there, now it's open. Now, there is a looting and crafting, and for the most part that works a lot like games like Far Cry. In fact, the similarities between this and Far Cry are also more than just the crafting system. It even includes things like towers. So they've actually gone the way of Ubisoft in some cases and included towers. Like you can see over there in the distance, there is a signal tower, and there's one particular mission. It's not for the entire game, don't worry, but it's a particular mission that has you climb up that tower and activate it in pretty much exactly the same way that Far Cry did. Granted though, those climbing puzzles are a lot trickier than Far Cry's was, so that's something to bear in mind. So here we have Skyrim, Far Cry, and Mirror's Edge, all in one, and a little bit of Dead Island thrown in for good measure. But how does it actually pan out? How does it actually come together? And frankly, as far as an open world game goes, you can see it's not doing a lot of things particularly new or different. But is that overall a bad thing? As far as the story goes anyway, you play the role of a double agent. You are actually a government agent that was sent in to recover a stolen file from a person who happened to be hiding out in this city. And what that actually means is that when you come in, you have all the equipment, you have... I'm just being attacked right now. You have a gun, which was taken away from you later on, and you have a radio. That radio is only seen in particular mission objectives, where you contact your superiors and report on what's going on. So after that, you happen to play the role on both sides, where you have one faction.
Get to the nearest safe house and wait until dawn. This is the last
It is nighttime now.
before dark.
Where you can see this building over here, I believe. This is the tower. And that is where one particular faction of survivors is hiding out. And this is the faction that you first start playing for. And right now I'm playing for the other faction, which is supposedly much larger and basically a bunch of thugs. And you have to complete missions for them in order to get supplies for your friends back at the tower. So that's the basics of the story as I've played so far. Now, let's have a look at the rest of the game. So, what else does this game have other than just a mashup of other games? Well, for one thing, we've just dropped down to 20 frames per second in this area. Not sure why. Anyway, so now it's holding steady at 30. I can actually explain a little bit more about the game. So we'll look at the crafting system first. So we have a bunch of blueprints, and you can find these throughout the game, either scattered around at locations or by completing mission objectives for characters. There are also random events where you can rescue survivors who are under attack either by thugs or by infected, and they'll give you a couple of upgrades as well. Those are not typically blueprints for things, but they are upgrades for weapons, for example. So I've actually unlocked a lot of stuff here. We can have a look there. So these are some of the weapon upgrades. But let's talk about the crafting here. So crafting involves combining different items. So once it's in your inventory, just double click and we craft an object. Now these all produce different quantities. For example, creating one unit of medkits at the beginning only produces one medkit, but then after unlocking some skills through the level progression, we can actually create more of these for each use. So it doesn't become too much of a grind as such to loot and create things. For example, a single blade and string can create 8 throwing stars, which are quite useful. So these are elemental as well, which are unlocked through level progression as well. And these will create 8 as well, which is a lot. We don't need so many most of the time, but they're good to have. So scavenging becomes less important very quickly. So let's have a look at the skill tree. Now the main skill is your survivor rank, and then the other 2 secondary skills are agility and power, both related to running and combat. So in survivor rank, you level this up by unlocking safe houses, which is very reminiscent of the way Far Cry did the unlocking of bases, for example. And it's simply a matter of sealing off the place and killing any infected that happen to be inside. It's not particularly difficult, although occasionally you do encounter tougher forms of infected. So by doing that and completing mission objectives as well, you gain survivor experience. And survivor experience will unlock several of these abilities. Now, some of these are completely locked, but we can have a look at what's available. So these are basically generic. They apply to a lot of things. For example, bartering allows you to get better prices at shops. This unlocks the ability to create boosters using herbs. Again, much like Far Cry, you create the syringes using herbs and all that. That's very similar to this. And elemental throwing stars are over here as well. And of course you can create more crafting items, but there's more things to it as well. You can create shields, for example, camouflage. This allows you to hide from the infected, creating fence traps, repairs, and more. So there are a lot of things to unlock here. If we go back and have a look at agility now, this governs all of the free running aspects, and as other sort of slightly combat related stuff, for example, grappling. You are able to grab and throw enemies around. The drop kick. This is a funny little move, probably reminiscent of WWE, where you basically jump and kick with both legs. This leaves you vulnerable for a moment as you're on the ground, but it is able to knock down enemies pretty easily. But I've gone for this skill, which is Vault, which allows you to run towards an enemy and use them as a sort of ramp to boost up. And it's quite useful for getting around sometimes, because infected happen to be everywhere, so it's like having little boosts everywhere you want to go. And of course, sliding. Again, there are also much more skills to unlock here. For example, tackling. You can actually elbow strike while running, and so on and so forth. Combat, again, allows you to unlock stunning abilities as well as throwing abilities. This allows you to throw your primary weapon, multi-throws, all sorts of things. All of these are unlocked as you progress throughout the game. And combat and agility, or rather agility and power levels, are leveled up as you go throughout the game. So just by vaulting over obstacles or climbing, we gain small amounts of XP throughout the game. There's no level cap actually for this, for just doing agility, and the same goes for combat. Every strike that you deal and every enemy that you damage and kill will gain power level XP. So that is how that sort of works. Now, the last thing I want to talk about are the actual weapons, because the weapons themselves, they all have different statistics. This is actually an Easter egg weapon that I've highlighted here, and I'm going to get onto that in a minute. We'll just talk about the different items at the moment. So most items are actually common, which are these grey colors. Weapons also come in this, but most equipment does as well. And then they go up in different rarities. For example, green, blue, orange, and purple. And they all have different stats. For example, this hammer here, which is actually damage, is a blue, and it has the following stats. So it does 62 damage per hit, and it has 37 durability, and a handling stat of 73. So how these work, damage is pretty self-explanatory. Durability is the amount of hits it can take before it breaks. And when I say breaks, it doesn't actually completely break, but it just means it doesn't deal damage as effectively anymore. And then the handling stat affects how much stamina it takes to swing, as well as how fast it swings. So something with a much higher handling stat, for example, the knife, has a handling of 135, so it's very fast and very light. Whereas something like a cricket bat has a handling stat of 60, much slower and much more tiring to use. So as you fight zombies, you have a stamina meter that goes down per swing, and you have to back off from combat and let it recharge. If you don't, then it makes all of your swings do a lot less damage. And but it's not affected by kicks, so you can just kick enemies away to let your stamina recharge, which is quite useful. And all of these are divided into different weapon types as well. So there's bladed weapons, there's long and short blades. So this knife here is a short blade, the Excalibur is a long blade, and these are blunt weapon, hammers, pipes, picks, bats, etc. all have different weapon types, and these are affected by blueprints. So if we want to upgrade them with things, they require a particular type. For example, this blueprint allows us to add electricity damage to our weapons, requires a long and short knife, and this is the same sort of thing, but it only affects pipes. And they all have different things as well. So this is the part of the upgrade system. So here, if we have a look here, we can actually upgrade this weapon. So here we've got an upgrade that is called Bruiser, and it does more damage and improves the handling of the weapon. We can socket more weapons here, for example Titan, which will increase its durability, or Juggernaut, which is the same thing but lower quality. So that's how the weapon upgrade system kind of works. And then weapon modifications, like for example here, adds bleeding damage. So all of these things, these weapons are upgradable and can be made for different purposes, and all of these work together quite nicely with the skills. I really like this sort of weapon modding system. The only thing is, you can't get attached to a weapon for too long. Each weapon has a set number of lives. For example, this knife here has 2 repairs remaining, and this means when the durability drops, it has only 2 more times to repair itself to full. You can repair it at any time, but once all of these repairs are gone, that weapon is no longer able to be repaired, and eventually you're going to have to dismantle it or sell it away. So that is the kind of downside of upgrading your weapons a lot. You want to make sure that they have the durability to withstand long-term combat. So that's the basics of it, really. As for Easter eggs, now this is a weapon that I found on the map, and it does a lot of damage. In fact, I'm pretty sure it's an instant kill for a lot of things, which I don't like all that much. However, it has very low durability, and it's got very low handling as well, so it's going to be very tiring to use. However, it is worth quite a lot of money, so having it just to sell later on would be quite useful. The only thing is, I'm not too keen on Easter egg weapons for the simple reason that I think they may unbalance the game. But for the most part, even using this weapon, I haven't really noticed too much of it unbalancing, simply because it doesn't last very long anyway, even with how much damage it does, which is very nice. Okay, so now it's nighttime, and we have very limited visibility. In fact, if we travel further on into the area, just going to use the Survivor Sense here. Survivor Sense, incidentally, very much like Hitman Absolution's Instinct ability, as well as you may remember from Lara Croft Tomb Raider, the 2012 Tomb Raider game. They had this Instinct survival sense as well, and this allows you to find lootable objects as well as see dangerous infected at night. Now, the normal infected are still around, but there are new enemy types that come out only at night, and they are quite terrifying. Now, for the most part, most enemies can't chase you. The typical zombie can't really follow you very far or very fast. Now, we do have a flashlight, which doesn't really affect the zombies all that much. They don't seem to notice it all that much, but now that nighttime is coming, we want to have our UV light available. Okay, so yes, as you look to the top right of the map there, you can see a cone of vision. That is a volatile, which is a type of enemy that doesn't have particularly good vision, but is very dangerous once they have seen you. They can follow you just as fast as you can move, and they deal a lot of damage. Basically, if you are caught by them, you are dead. And that makes nighttime a totally different ballgame, because not only is your free running ability not as powerful as it is in the daytime, it also makes doing anything at night a lot more difficult. So let's just kick you out of the way. And as you can see, we can see very, very little. And blindfold there, that's going to definitely not be good for us at all. And I think we've been seen. We've been seen. Try to get out of the way. And we're dead. That is how quick it is. Once we've been seen, the running away from them doesn't really help as much. The only thing that seems to stop them is using either a safe zone or firing the UV light at them. So that is an enemy type that you really want to avoid. Thankfully, though, if you're paying attention to your map anyway and planning your routes more effectively, it is much better for it. The only thing is, and I'm going to get on to the stuff that I don't like about this game at this point, and it is that nighttime is very short. Now, I said earlier that it's not entirely a bad thing, mainly because nighttime is particularly scary. Anybody who's not a fan of jump scares and this and that will not appreciate those night terrors chasing them at all. In fact, the first time they introduced them is through something like a jump scare, actually. So if you're not a fan of that sort of thing, you're going to hate nighttime quite a lot. However, the reason I don't like nighttime is not because of how much scarier the atmosphere is. Look, it's basically pitch black and we can see nothing, so I've got to turn my flashlight on. The reason is there are certain mission types that can only be cleared at nighttime. And this is to force you to face the enemy that, or rather the more dangerous enemy types at nighttime. That is the reason they've done that, so that you have to face them. You can't just avoid. There's one right outside as well, isn't there? You can't just avoid the nighttime and do all your missions in the day. So they've tried to make use of the nighttime as much as possible. However, because of how short the nighttime is, it makes completing missions very difficult. And I'm going to illustrate the problem with the map. So you can see the entire map is actually quite large. It's not a small map by any means. And to go from one side of the map to another can take some time if you can't see where you're going. So being able to clear missions at nighttime becomes much more difficult unless you have a safe zone nearby. But even with that, doing the mission quickly and effectively at night can become more difficult, as most places that have no lights on them are, let's say, a lot more densely populated with enemies, and dying becomes very easy then. And every time you die, time passes, and it usually means you have to wait for the next night in order to clear it. Now, you can go to a safe zone and simply wait. I can go here and wait until morning and reclaim survivor points. But by doing that, it means that clearing night missions becomes a very tedious thing to do, much more than normal. Incidentally, every time you die, you do lose survivor XP. I've not noticed it remove levels from doing that, but I'd assume it probably does if it drops below 0. It might, I'm not entirely sure, but either way you can lose survivor XP for dying. Makes sense, but if you're being forced to do nighttime missions, it's gonna get annoying. So that's really my main gripe with this game, that the nighttime just is too short to really complete missions properly without dying several times. Or without using safe zones to constantly wait until night. So if I go back to the bed over here, I can wait until night again. But I'm going to have to keep doing this if I keep failing the night missions, which makes it a cycle of frustration. So, overall, is it any good? Well, as far as a game that mashes up so many different types of concepts together, I'd say it has merits. It is definitely very enjoyable. I mean, I'm having a lot of fun playing this either way, but there's just something about it that I think will irk a lot of people, because frankly, if you're not a fan of Mirror's Edge, you're not going to like the moving system. If you're not a fan of Dead Island's combat system, you're not going to like it in this. And if you're not a fan of Far Cry 3 sort of fetching and gathering and scavenging, you might not like this at all. But combining all those together, does it really work? That is the main question. Does it actually work to combine all those concepts together? And in some cases it does, but it does fall short when sort of executing the open world aspect of it, because some of the things do get very repetitive, and I understand that's part and parcel of the way open world games typically work. However, by saying that as well, the variety of things to do, aside from the story missions, gets very monotonous. I've so far cleared the same sort of survivor random encounters, looted the same sort of things, and buildings, some of them look very, very similar. And these are gripes that would be typical of any sort of open world game, frankly. But at least I can say one thing. I'm not entirely sure how I did that just then. I will say one thing about this game, is that as far as zombie survival or zombie-based games go, it's attempting to do something different. And incorporating the parkour element to it as well takes the tedium of traveling out of the game entirely by making it more of a puzzle and more of a challenge to do so. So overall, it's kind of a mixed thing for me. While I'm enjoying the game quite a lot, I can see a lot of things in it that don't really work together all that well. That being said though, you are going to need a powerful machine to run this game because, and it looks gorgeous by the way, I'm not going to discount the graphics, they are definitely making use of the resources that they get. However, there is this weird blurring effect that happens between frames in order to smooth it out, which I don't really like, because at the moment the game is dipping to 30 FPS at the moment, and you can probably see this on the video, that when I'm moving around it sort of blurs around as though I'm moving in slow motion. But anyway, you are going to need a powerful PC to run this. Even after significant optimization recently in the latest patches, it still doesn't run all that well on a lot of machines. My machine is not particularly fantastic or anything, but it definitely averages 60 FPS on a lot of other games as well. This is one game that it seems to struggle immensely with. So, and I don't think people will really appreciate having the weather change and then their frame rate change too. It just kind of takes the fun out of the experience just a little bit. But overall, I wouldn't say that this is a game I would recommend for everybody, simply because there's a lot of features in it that might annoy people. And because it's doing things based on a lot of other games, there's nothing particularly original about it other than, I suppose, the combination of zombie and parkour. I mean, that's the only really unique thing about it. The rest of it seems to be just mishmash of mechanics and elements from a lot of other games, and frankly, that doesn't make it a particularly original concept altogether. So, if you're not a fan of some of the mechanics from other games, well, sorry, that's what you're gonna get with this. So there you have it, ladies and gentlemen, this is Dying Light. An interesting title, but that mixes a lot of different game concepts together from a lot of other games. But one that, unlike my main character, doesn't completely fall flat on his ass. Thank you very much for watching. Dying Light now available on Steam for $60 or your regional equivalent. My name is Panzer, and I'll see you next time.